Should progressives perhaps even join the far-right militia movement in pushing back against any sort of government intrusion into our lives, because it'll simply become corporate intrusion at some point, which may be even more destructive. Parents in Texas, Texas and Minnesota have filed lawsuits against state governments that are taking involuntarily and without telling anybody, taking DNA samples from their newborn children. Now, they're doing this to test for genetic diseases, and that seems like a good thing. But on the other hand, if that information is sold into the public marketplace, or if there's evidence of a genetic disease, which it may not manifest or may simply be transmissible into future generations, but some insurance company decides they're going to pull a plug on coverage or jack up the rates, is that now not a good thing? States are testing for between 28 and 54 conditions, and the problem is the specimens don't always stay in the state labs. They are often given to outside researchers, which is a good thing, but sometimes with the baby's names attached, which becomes a bad thing. So in Minnesota and Texas, by the way, the states are required to destroy these DNA samples, but only if you ask and you fill out a form. Most parents don't even know to ask. They don't even know what's going on. Dr. Art Kaplan is with us. He is a medical ethicist, professor of bioethics, director of the Center for Bioethics at the University of Pennsylvania, author of 25 books, including his most recent, The Penn Center Guide to Bioethics. The website, of course, med.upenn.edu. Dr. Art Kaplan, welcome back to our program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Your take, there are layers of complexity in this story. What at the top level, at the biggest picture level, your take on hospitals involuntarily taking DNA samples from newborn babies and screening them for genetic diseases?
I think, Tom, it's a good idea that we take a blood sample, which is what we're talking about, a heel stick, as they call it,
right,
to the baby's heel, when every baby is born, to look for genetic diseases. And let me be clear, I do not think we need parents' permission. The reason we're doing it is to help the babies, because there are some genetic diseases where you change the infant's diet right away, get them off breast milk,
right,
get them off formula, you can prevent mental retardation and death.
Right.
So these are rare. They're not common problems. PKU is one listeners may have heard of.
Right.
You don't want to wait for the parents to give permission to do that. You got to do it right at birth. You got to move fast. And anyway, we've already established through many, many court decisions that when it's a life and death situation for an infant, you can override parental denials. So at the birth, I'm all in favor of taking this blood stick, trying to help save infants, moving
right,
rapidly.
And I wouldn't disagree, and I don't think any reasonable person would. But there's a but coming, isn't there?
There is a but. Then we take that blood sample and put it on a cardboard cord, kind of imagine blotting something onto a piece of paper,
mm-hmm,
and you put the identifying name of the baby and maybe some other information, date of birth, parents' names, and you send it off to your state capital. That's
right,
been going on probably 40 years.
Yeah.
Now, why? Well, there are two reasons. One, you can look in that set of cords and figure out whether the incidence of some diseases that babies have is going up or down, like cystic fibrosis or Down syndrome.
Right, we're talking about things, epidemiology.
Yep, basic epidemiology.
Right.
Interesting enough, you don't need anybody's name to do that.
Right.
You have to look at a lot of cards.
Yeah, all you need to know is the geography.
Correct. The second reason is to do research where you might want to have somebody's name, and that's where the problem is.
Right.
We've had this system set up for a long time. I can't say anybody ever abused it. I don't know of one case where anybody's been harmed, but in an era in which the insurance companies, since we don't have health reform, are starting to get nervous and saying, well, if you have cystic fibrosis or a risk factor for this or that, maybe we won't insure you, maybe it's not such a good idea to keep identified information in these big state databases.
Right, and in fact, that is a concern. This article by Elizabeth Cohen, CNN's senior medical correspondent, talking about Annie Brown's daughter Isabel. When she was a month old, they took a blood sample. They found that she did have a genetic disease. She didn't have it full blown, so it wasn't anything needed to be done about. But it could disqualify her some health insurance company could down the road say, no, we're not going to insure you. And if you have children, we're definitely not going to insure them because this is a transmissible genetic disease. And do we really want this kind of information in the hands of private corporations that have not the public good as their primary goal, but private profit as their primary goal? Or for that matter, do we want it in the hands of government agencies who state that the public good is their primary goal and yet increasingly are being taken over by corporate interests?
And the other problem is sometimes DNA databases get handed over to state police, to FBI, all kinds of folks have an interest from government agency to government agency. So,
right.
Lest listeners think this is another one of these problems with no solution, I have an idea here.
Okay,
what's
that?
The idea is, why don't we anonymize, take out the identifiers, but keep them coded and create a third party whose job it is to decide if it ever makes sense to break the code and relink the data. In other words,
right. This is basically, there was a study report in the New York Times recently where they went back and discovered that there was this huge blood, a whole bunch of blood that had been drawn of GIs in the 40s.
Data bank. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And they were able to discover that this had to do with Hep C, which nobody knew even existed in the 40s.
Right.
And so some brilliant epidemiology was able to be done. They tracked a bunch of these guys down in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. They found that unless they were alcoholic, it didn't seem to affect mortality, which was a big shock for everybody. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing couldn't have been done. But they were semi-anonymized in as much as the only identifier on all of these was the dog tag number, the serial number, the military serial number.
Right.
So there was a government agency that you would have to go through to get access to that information. And so you're suggesting that be the case for all babies.
I am, and I think it would be a mistake to throw this stuff out, and here's why. Someday we may find something that says, you know what, if your baby had cystic fibrosis risk factors, like the case you described, we now have a medicine, and we want to notify all those people who are now 25 or 30 years old if there's something out there for them.
Right.
We need to have that database.
Okay, so let's take this a step further, Dr. Art Kaplan, in the minute and a half or so we've got left. Britain right now is building a national database.
UK data bank, right?
Right, of everybody's DNA. And they started out with anybody who has any contact with the police, and they're growing it from there.
Right.
And so they can very quickly find if somebody's raped who the rapist is. They can very quickly find if somebody's beaten up who the mugger is, if there's some skin tissue left behind. Mm-hmm. With a benign government, that seems like a reasonable thing. But what if the government starts becoming more like China or Singapore?
Yeah, it's a big danger. I think you've got to separate out these police uses from research uses. For research, let's set up the trusted third party. I don't care if it's made up of people from disease groups, ordinary citizens.
And yet at the same time, if it was your daughter who was raped, wouldn't you want the rapist to be immediately caught?
I would, but I may have to yield on that one to some notion of protection of privacy because it's going to be very easy to abuse this system. On the other hand, maybe I'm happier if you're convicted of crime, you have to put your DNA sample in. And
that's where they started.
Just accused and arrested.
Yeah, that's where they started. And some states are doing that now in the United States. And I don't disagree with you that a person convicted of at least a violent crime.
Yep.
Particularly sexual violent crimes, rape and things like that, that tend to be repeat offenders. That
so
might be a good place to start.
There are things we could do to protect ourselves here. We've got to start pushing our legislation.
Dr. Art Kaplan is his most recent book, The Penn Center Guide to Bioethics. Thank you, Doctor.
Hey, thanks.